Hello and welcome to the Empowered Life podcast. I am so excited to be here with my friend, Dr. John Sottery. And John is just as high energy as I am. So we hope that you're ready to get your butt kicked with knowledge over the next hour about some incredible nutritional information. Now, this information is not meant to take the place of any medical advice you've ever received. You want to go and speak with your doctor. But what's incredible about John is he's been a scientist for the last 30 years. He has his PhD from Duke. He has received numerous awards and has been involved in a ton of groundbreaking product development. His educational programs have attracted over 120 companies from 16 different countries to learn about the science, to understand the why about what you're doing. Because how many times you go on Google, you hear from the neighbor next door, this doctor tells you this naturopath tells you this person's taken this crazy thing, and you don't know what's right from wrong, what's up from down, and you find yourself incredibly confused. So what attracted me to John was he nerds out like me about the science. Give me the facts, give me the why, and then tell me what to do. So over this next hour, I'm incredibly excited to have him here chatting about the food that you eat. Is it harming you or helping you? The supplements that you take. Do you need them? Don't you need them? What is the actual science behind what we're putting into our body? So, John, so excited that you're here.
Thank you. And that was a beautiful introduction. And I love your passion. I love your energy. I love that you're just going for it and helping people. And I know that, you're going to be huge in this space. And, I'm so happy that you're a friend of mine. So, and I'm excited today. I like to, let's crank through a bunch of stuff and see if we can help some folks. And if you think I'm going too deep, or if you need me to, hey, John, turn that into English, I'll try to take it up a couple levels and like that. But I'm like you. I want to know. Show me the facts, show me the science, show me the clinical studies, show me the molecular mechanism. Explain to me why this is really different, because I've seen a million marketing messages and, people can create a great story. It's like, okay, the story is nice, but like you said, show me the facts. Or as they said in Jerry Maguire, show me the data. No, I'm sorry, actually, show me the money, but same thing.
Same thing, right? Put it in front of my face. And we know the health and fitness industry is $1 billion industry. So you're right. The messages that we get are so mixed and all over the place. And you want to be able to distinguish between what's real, what's factual.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's dig in. So one of the topics that, we talk about is cancer, right? And a lot of you hear about processed foods, the way foods are heated up or cooked, or, should you cook your food this way? What foods are you eating that could cure cancer, could cause cancer? I mean, this is a really big thing when we're talking about the markers, that can fire in our body. Nutrition can either heal us or harm us. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. And one thing that I don't think a lot of people realize is that almost all of us have cancer in our bodies multiple times in our lifetime. But the immune system can come in and hunt down those cancer cells and kill them off. So it's not like you never get it. And so when people are really depressed, when people have lower immune function, they're more susceptible. Mm-hmm. So I've had some people in my life that I was extremely close to that have been taken by cancer. And, you can lose half your body weight. It can, you're in the medical field, how brutal it can be. And, I made the decision I was going to do everything in my power to never go down that road if I could avoid it. Now, nothing's 100%, but you can make smart moves and you can do things to improve your situation. So, the first thing I would say to people is when you go to a physical, get your doctor to check the box for the 25 hydroxy vitamin D, 25 OH vitamin D on your blood test. The normal range is 30 to 100 nanograms per milliliter. But the challenge is that there's a ton of Americans that are in the 20s, and there are millions of Americans that are in the teens. And if you look at a graph of like 8 or 9 different cancers, and you look at the 25 hydroxy vitamin D levels on this axis, and then you look at the prevalence of the cancer, you really need to get into that 40 to 50 nanogram per milliliter range to minimize your risk of cancer. And when you start going really, getting down into the 20s or getting down into the teens, your risk of cancer starts to climb dramatically. Mechanistically, I believe that there are receptors on your immune cells, on your natural killer cells that actually attach to cancer cells and kill them. And when you don't have enough vitamin D, you're not telling your special forces guys to go out and hunt for cancer cells. And you really want those guys out there protecting you. You want to kill it when it's small, not when you have a tumor that is, 7 centimeters and growing like hell. You want to knock it out right when it's trying to initiate. So I'm going to turn,
So what are some things that deplete your vitamin D? And then what are the best ways then to get that vitamin D since it's so vital?
All right. So vitamin D is made in the skin. Normally, you make it from the sun. There's a molecule in your skin. It's called 6-dehydrocholesterol. But it's a cholesterol precursor. You need a UVB photon, which means you only really make vitamin D well between, let's say, 10 and 2, the times they tell you to stay out of the sun. Really? Because you need a UVB photon, and between 10 and 2, the light goes through the minimal path length in the ozone layer, so you get more UVB. Now it's good and bad. UVB is what gives you a sunburn, but UVB is also what makes vitamin D, because the first step is you have to photochemically break the ring on the cholesterol, and then there's a proton that has to go through a shift, and then it has to go through a rearrangement. But you build up this vitamin D precursor in your skin. It dissolves into your bloodstream. It goes to your liver. It gets changed once, and then it goes to the cells and gets changed into active vitamin D. So that was a mouthful. So the trick is you probably need 5 or 10 minutes of sun between 10 and 2. So that's the good news. Now, what I tell people is do not install vitamin D solar panels on your face, because the UVB is also going to do some damage. So I try to get people to make vitamin D with their legs, with their back, get outside, do a workout, take off some clothing, get some sun exposure, but don't make it with your face, because you really don't want to photo age your face. So you're not going to make much vitamin D at 5 or 6 in the afternoon, and you're not going to make much at 8 in the morning. So you make it photochemically. That's how you do it naturally. Now, if you live in Maine or Philly or Alaska or any of the northern climates, that's when the low vitamin D levels really become an issue, especially in the wintertime. So if you get it measured, you probably want to get it measured ideally, let's say in February or March, and then you're going to see kind of where are you at the low end, because your vitamin D is going to cycle through the year. So in September, you're probably going to have your highest vitamin D at the end of the summer, and the people in Australia are going to have the lowest, and vice versa. If you go back and you look at, March or whatever, then you're probably going to be at your lowest, and the people in Australia are going to be at their highest. So you make it photochemically. You want to get just a little bit of sun. I've seen studies that say in 10 minutes, you can make 25,000 international units in your skin. And it also is it's a self-limiting process. So once you make enough, the body shuts it down. You don't want to get to the point where you start getting pink, where you start getting sunburned. But ultraviolet is not evil. We grew up in an environment with ultraviolet. The body uses those high energy photons to do some chemistry. So making it in the sun is good. But if you live in a northern climate and the sun never gets very high in the sky for the whole day, you almost have to supplement it, particularly in the winter. And the data that I see says that most adults need somewhere between 4,000 and 7,000 international units a day to get to 40 nanograms per milliliter. So always look at the units on your vitamin D test. If you're in the US, it's almost always going to be reported as nanograms per milliliter. So 40 to 50. Now the normal range goes all the way up to 100. The challenge is when you start pushing out to the high end of the range, you might create some other problems. And I don't think there's any need to go there if somebody had cancer, maybe we should talk about it.
Yeah.
So you can either, now in terms of what foods have vitamin D, it's one of the most tasty foods on the planet. It's cod liver oil. No, so I usually say to people, either make it in the sun or, or take a vitamin D supplement. And again, you want to take the vitamin D3. I also think it's very important for women that want to become pregnant to make sure that they have their vitamin D levels in the right range. I've seen some data that say that juvenile diabetes can be triggered if the mother has very low vitamin D status. So I'm a big believer in making some smart moves if you're thinking about starting a family. I have a couple little ones, and they're just so magical, and they mean everything to me. And I'm just so happy that they're healthy. But I want to do everything I can to help that along.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know if that was too much detail, but that's kind of vitamin D in a snapshot. And I think here's one other thing. You can look at cancer rates, and then you can plot it. How far do you live away from the equator? And there's a lot of different cancers that go up dramatically. So if you live in Florida, your cancer risk is much lower versus if you live in Massachusetts or Maine or Alaska or Canada. I mean, because the further you get from the equator, then the harder it is to make vitamin D. So they believe that's the connection. And one last thing on vitamin D before we leave it. I did a talk on how to not die from melanoma, which I thought was important. And in Australia, about 2 years ago, they looked at 200 consecutive patients that presented with malignant melanoma. And the day they presented, they pulled blood samples and they measured their 25-OH vitamin D. And what they found was the people that were down below 20, their risk of having a much thicker melanoma, a higher Breslow score, went up, I think, by 200 to 300%. Wow. And what's the mechanism is, the light initiated the melanoma, but the people that had low vitamin D, their immune system wasn't fighting as effectively. And melanoma doesn't kill you. What kills you is when that melanoma starts growing into your skin and then gets to your blood vessels, and then some of those cells then go to your brain or your liver or your lungs. It's when it metastasizes, that's when it kills you. So you want your immune system in there fighting it every step of the way, either when it initially happens or minimizing its growth. And my last point before I leave melanoma is, when you see something on your skin, pretend that somebody just glued a hand grenade on you and pulled the pin. Don't say, I hope it's a dud. You have a certain amount of time to get it off, and you have a 100% cure rate. So if that's the situation, get it off, go to the dermatologist, have them take a look at it and get it off. Don't gamble with your life. So, if you see something and you can go on the web and Google it, but the whole ABCD, A stands for asymmetry, B stands for border, irregular border, asymmetric, those are both bad. C stands for color, which doesn't really help you that much because the color can be so, all over the place. It can be black or brown, or it can be red. But they needed it to be ABCD. And then D stands for diameter. Diameter, I think about 6 millimeters, or the size of a pencil eraser. That's the key thing on melanoma.
Yeah, so that's amazing. So to recap, get outside at least 5-10 minutes, boost that vitamin D. Best ways to get it through your skin in the sunlight. It's going to rush that immunity to either ward off cancer, or if you've got a cancer, it's going to help fight it. And that's the best way, right? Get outside in that sunshine, but a little bit, not too much, not too little.
Just a little bit. It's also good to get a little sunshine in your eyes, to ditch the sunglasses or the contact lenses that have UV filtering. You can get 5 minutes of sun into your eyes too, to help reinforce your circadian rhythms, and it triggers some other biochemistry too. Okay. So ultraviolet is not all evil. I tell people it's like a bath. It's like when you're taking a bath. If you have, way too much water and it flows over and ruins your first floor, that really sucks. But if you don't have enough, that's a problem too. You got to get the right amount of each micronutrient and even ultraviolet, and vitamin D is involved in like 4,000 different biochemical processes in the body. It's really not a vitamin, it's a hormone. And if you look at the structure of vitamin D, it looks a lot more like estrogen or testosterone or pregnenolone than it does, like anything else. And it's really a hormone that you make photochemically in the skin.
Yeah, I would much rather go out in the lovely sunshine than take cod liver oil. So thank you for that.
I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you.
So it's interesting you talked a bit about pregnancy, and I kind of want to go there. I want to go with that.
Sure.
You talked about that vitamin D, pregnancy, and I have a lot of moms or a lot of women who are either trying to get pregnant, hope to get pregnant, are pregnant. And even in my own personal experience, I know the first thing when my doctor says to me, are you trying for baby number 2? Are you taking your folic acid? Are you taking your folic acid? And again, I've seen some mixed reviews there about, is folic acid all it's cracked up to be? Do you really need it? Does it really prevent those neural tube defects? Or what is the science? Because I know you know the science. What does the science say about that?
So, two things. Number one is folic acid prevents these neural tube defects, these birth defects, and it's really important. But folic acid, I don't believe is the active agent. It has to be converted into the active agent in the body. Mm-hmm. So there was a new version of folate. I think it's, I can't think of the full name, but it's like a tetrahydrofolate. So they actually give you the bioactive version. I think that's a lot better than folic acid. Of course, when you look at all the boxes, they all want to say 100%, and they want to use folic acid because that's the least expensive way to put the vitamin in. But if you're looking for a B vitamin, if you're going to take folic acid, I would look for that tetrahydrofolate because it's much better for you. And I also have seen some negatives on building up too much folic acid in the body because you're getting it. Every food you have is trying to give you 100% of the folic acid, whether it's your total cereal or your Cheerios or your Wheaties or whatever. Everyone's loading in and you're getting folic acid from so many sources. I see why they're trying to do that. But I would say even more important than folic acid is choline. So choline is something that you find in egg yolks. And choline is the precursor when your brain is going to make acetylcholine. But I've seen data, and you can Google this, choline in pregnancy and so on. But choline is 10 to 20 times more effective than folic acid at preventing the neural tube defects. So I'm a big believer that says that women that want to become pregnant should make sure that they're eating some egg yolks to get plenty of choline. And then during the pregnancy, also eating some egg yolks. Now, remind me later, because I have probably have my approach for everything, but I have my approach for how do you cook an egg, because you want to cook the egg gently. Remember we talked about some of the things where you can damage some of the molecules. You don't want to do that. So you don't want to.
So tell us about it. How do you cook an egg?
Okay, so the eggs are an amazing food source for most people. If you're allergic to eggs, you got to stay away from them. I get that. But for most people, eggs are a very, very good food source. Now, for 25 years, they'd be like, don't eat eggs. Or if you eat eggs, just eat the egg whites. Right. But most of the nutrition is in the yolk.
Right.
Now, here's the thing. In that yolk, you're going to have some cholesterol. Now, I don't think cholesterol is evil. Cholesterol is necessary for life. However, in the wrong form, it can cause you problems. Sure. But what you don't want is oxidized cholesterol. You don't want rusty cholesterol, because that's one of the things that's been implicated in terms of triggering the cardiovascular disease and the plaques in your arteries and so on. And so when I cook an egg, I will put it in a pan. I will cook it sunny side up at the lowest possible temperature, and I'll put a cover on because I don't want the top to be all runny. So I'll cook it as gently as possible. It might take 8 or 9 minutes for it to cook over, but you really want the yolk to be runny. I like to have the top cooked over just because I don't like egg yolk that's not cooked. So that's just me, but cook your eggs as gently as possible. The worst place is when you go out for breakfast and they're making eggs, and those guys have those gas stoves and they're cranked up and they throw the egg on and it bubbles up. Yeah. They're cooking it at high temperature. You denature the proteins. You screw up the proteins so they're not as useful for you. And then you start to damage the other molecules like the cholesterol. You start to oxidize it. So if you're going to eat eggs, cook them. You can poach them, or if you cook them in a fry pan, very low temperature, a little grass-fed butter is always nice. And I put a lid on so that way the steam returns the energy back to the top of the egg and cooks it.
Makes complete sense, right? It's almost like eating, they say eat food raw, eat it in its purest form. Obviously you can't eat raw meat. Well, you can, but you
can, again, and as long as there's no salmonella, you're good to go. But anyone that's dealt with food poisoning, I'd rather cook mine, I'd rather take that balancing act. Yeah, I see some benefit with raw eggs, but if you cook them gently, you're much more towards the side of the raw egg versus the the little super ball that you get when you go to, I won't mention any places in particular, but they cook the hell out of the eggs and they cook them fast. And so that's not a good thing.
And share with me, you were telling me the other evening about fried food. Speaking about going out to eat, we know I always coach my ladies, go out if it's a celebration, go out and enjoy yourself. But the more you can cook at home and eat clean food when you know how you've prepared it, you know what's in it, is always the healthiest bit. But of course, you're going to go out to eat. You're going to have those treats. You're going to go enjoy yourself. But I do try to stay away from fried food, only because I feel like my gut rots, like after I eat it, right? Like it just doesn't sit right with me. But there is actually some science, again, behind the fried food and why you should stay away from it when you got to eat. So can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just so everyone knows, I've eaten a lot of fried food in my life. And when I was younger, it's like, let's go to McDonald's, in the 60s. And I love the fisherman's platters. You go up and have the fried shrimp, or you'd have the whatever. And occasionally I'll still eat a little bit of, because I think nutrition should be guidance. It shouldn't be a religion. It shouldn't lock you in. But, I want to minimize it. So the biggest problem I have with fried foods, 15 years ago, was that the oils that they were cooked in oils that had trans fats, where they took fats that were normally in a cis configuration around a double bond, and then they had added hydrogen gas to try to saturate some of the bonds, and they flipped into a trans configuration. And those trans fats, everyone knows now, trans fats kill you. Now, of course, I knew that in like the early 1990s when I read the nurses study and stopped eating them then. And then I told people at work, I go, these will be banned in the next 10 years. And, some of my guys were eating Twinkies and they were eating all this crap and eating the donuts at, I won't mention the place, and I said, trust me, they're going to be banned. And I remember when they were banned in New York City, and then they were, and then FDA decided that they were no longer be allowed in food. So trans fats are a problem, but that's a problem that's kind of gone away. The bigger problem is that most of the stuff that is cooked in these unsaturated oils. And when I say unsaturated, all that means is the oils have some carbon-carbon double bonds. And those are areas where oxygen can come in and rip off electrons and oxidize them. So polyunsaturated vegetable oil is the most susceptible to oxidation. So you go to a restaurant, they fill up that fryer. They don't throw that oil away every day. That oil is at high temperature for hour after hour after hour. And the oxygen comes in and it starts to oxidize those oils. And the oils start getting brown. And you build up more and more toxic products in those oils over time. And then when you look at the French fry, I picture it as like a sponge, and they're soaking up some of that nasty fryer-later oil, and I'm consuming it. And I don't feel well. So if I do some fried stuff, I might cook some things in coconut oil at home, because I'm willing to throw away the oil, or I'll use an oil that's saturated, which doesn't undergo the oxidation. But all that oxidized oil is incredibly nasty. And if you stay away from it for a month and do a challenge test and then go back and have a fisherman's platter, you're going to see, oh my God, you're going to feel it. Because once you get a clean diet and you go back, it's like, wow, my body will not tolerate this. This is miserable. So, I skipped through relatively quickly. One point I want to make on trans fats. People think trans fats are banned. No, trans fats have to be labeled. And one point I want to make to you is, if the ingredient statement has the phrase partially hydrogenated, whether it's partially hydrogenated soybean oil or some other oil, that's not a good thing.
Right.
And that means that there will be some trans fats. But the trick is, if they set the serving size small enough so that there's less than 0.4999 grams of trans fats in one serving, it can say 0 grams trans fat. But that's not true, because you don't generally eat only 3 crackers or 1 cracker or whatever. So when you see a product that has partially hydrogenated on the label and it has a really small serving size, that's them formulating it so that they got below the 0.499 gram trans fat per serving. And I basically would just toss that one back on the shelf, or when Zachary runs up to me and hands it to me, Daddy looks at the box and says, no, we're not buying this one. Okay, let's keep moving. Yeah. So we talked about, fried food. Don't get me wrong, it tastes great. I love it. But then again, if you gave me some poison and said, John, this is the best tasting poison you've ever had, try some, I'm probably going to be able to say, no, I think I'm going to pass, But I don't judge people that eat fried food. Now, the other thing is, it also makes sense. You think, well, gee, let's cook it in peanut oil because that makes a lot of sense. If you think that cooking French fries in peanut oil makes sense, I suggest that you read Paul and Soching Jamonet's book, The Perfect Health Diet, because they teach you what that does to you at a molecular level. We don't have time for that today, but those guys are incredibly bright and talented, and that's an exceptional book. So it's called The Perfect Health Diet. It's Paul and Soching Jamonet. They're both Harvard PhDs, brilliant people, very well-researched book. So.
Amazing. And I want to talk a bit about, because you blew my mind when we talked about sweet potatoes. I'm like, yeah, I love sweet potatoes. We know sweet potatoes have so many amazing properties, good anti-inflammatory, healthy carb, great alternative to white potatoes and your pasta and that sort of stuff. But you're like, how do you make your sweet potatoes? And I'm like, is there a difference in how you make them? And you're like, yes.
I remember that I was on one of your videos and I asked a question. I go, how do you prepare them?
Why are you asking me this, John? I should know there's something behind this. Tell me a bit about the best way, because in the macro plans that I give people, I give everybody sweet potato. It's such a healthy, great carb.
Yeah. It is. So let's talk about it real quick from a chemistry perspective. So sweet potatoes are mostly carbohydrate. And carbohydrates are just trillions and trillions and trillions of glucose molecules all connected together. So I tell people, picture them like Legos, and you have these huge chains that have trillions of glucoses, and they're all connected together. So you're like, well, how does that give me energy? When you chew it up in your mouth, you have an enzyme in your saliva called amylase. And amylase goes in there and clips those linkages and converts that long chain of glucoses. And glucose by glucose, it releases it. So your blood sugar comes up nice and gradually. So everything sounds really good.
Right.
And if you boil your sweet potatoes, all those carbohydrate chains pretty much stay intact. So that's a good thing too. But if you say, I like mine baked because they're a lot sweeter. It's like, well, there's a reason why they're a lot sweeter. And it's because when you cook them at high temperature, you fracture those carbohydrate chains. So now you have these little tiny fragments. And when you consume them, the amylase is like, wow, this is awesome. They're all broken up into little pieces. All I have to do is just do a little bit of work. And we're gonna have glucose, till the cows come home. And sure enough, if you looked at the glycemic index of a boiled sweet potato and compared it to a baked sweet potato, and the same thing goes with white potatoes, the glycemic index when you bake them is like eating table sugar.
Wow.
It's like eating table sugar in terms of how much your glucose increases over the next 2 hours.
Wow.
And we'll get into that in a little bit, but when your glucose spikes up, your body has to respond and it has to start dumping a lot of insulin in your blood. And then that has a downside. So I suggest, again, you can have a baked sweet potato sometimes. I don't want to be like, killjoy, but 90% of the time you eat sweet potatoes, try to boil them and mash them. And put a little grass-fed butter in or put a little olive oil in, some good fat, because that'll also slow the carbohydrate release into your blood, and that'll help mute that blood sugar peak as well. So.
That's amazing. And I know a lot of people, what they do is they make that healthy alternative to fries and they bake sweet potatoes and they bake sweet potato fries, right?
Yeah.
Things where, again, in moderation, not a bad idea. You can certainly do that. But just understanding the science behind there's a better way to consume your sweet potato. or health.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it just depends on how motivated you are. I mean, some people may go to 90-10, some people may go to 100-0, some people may only go to 60-40, but I'd rather have you do more of them and not put such a load on your body to produce so much insulin. Because insulin isn't, you can't live without it, but it does. Most people in the US are swimming in insulin. It's brutal. It's killing them. And I'll tell you one other thing, and that is, because I know everyone's motivated to age better, there are something called advanced glycation endpoints, and they named it AGE because it ages you. So when you go to the doctor and they run a hemoglobin A1C, what they're doing is they're looking at how much glucose has reacted with the proteins in your red blood cells. Now, why do they measure it in your blood? Well, one, it's easy to get a blood sample. But number two, the blood cells get replaced every 3 months. So it gives you a 3-month moving average of what your blood sugar has been for those last 90 days. Now, having your hemoglobin glycolated is not a huge issue because your body's going to replace those red blood cells. Guess what? The rest of your body's not being replaced. And so if you're aging your red blood cells much faster with way too much glucose, you're also aging the arteries in your eyes, you're aging your body, you're making this cellular junk that's going to make you old before your time. And we don't have time to get into all the things, but you can Google AGEs and you can read about all the nightmares. So more glucose in your blood, higher average glucose has, really negative effects in terms of how well you're going to age and how likely that it is that you're going to get, adult onset diabetes, and which type 2 diabetes is just exploding. It's a nightmare. Yeah.
So instead of going and spending all that money on expensive face cream and things to make you look younger, just stop eating sugar, and we might not age ourselves so quickly, right?
Yeah, I hear you, but so many people, they think that sugar is what they put in their coffee, and yet sugar, your body turns carbohydrate into glucose. Table sugar is half glucose and half fructose. It's a disaccharide. And I think even for a lot of people, fructose is even more damaging because, if we get a chance, if we have time, let's talk about fructose at the end, because that's one of it's like, I should do a video, how does processed food kill you? And fructose is like one of the key mechanisms,
Right. And speak a little bit about, I'm recently reading, I'm like late in the game to read this book, Wheat Belly, but it's mind blowing that they say, a piece of whole wheat bread has a higher GI index than a candy bar. And you're like, again, that misconception that it's healthy, it's whole wheat, it's a whole grain, it's gluten. Yeah. So is there a little bit of, what's the science behind gluten and your gut there and those sorts of things?
Well, I mean, whole wheat bread, they've left everything in from the wheat. White flour, they've pulled certain things out and then they bleached it and so on. But both of them are carbohydrates, and both of them are going to be acted upon by the amylase in your mouth. And both of them are going to drive up your blood sugar. And so just because you make it whole grain doesn't necessarily make it healthy. Right. Now, again, I love the taste of bread, and I grew up eating bread and so on, but I eat very little bread now. And the reason is seeds, wheat and other seeds, they don't want all their other plants, they don't want all their seeds to be eaten by mammals. And so they have, over thousands or millions of years, developed ways to sabotage the digestion of the animals that would eat their seeds, because they want their seeds to survive and to flourish. And so, gluten is a protein that's in bread. It's very critical in terms of how it rises and how it feels and the texture. But unfortunately, everyone knows, you probably know someone that has celiac disease, somebody from European descent, and they have celiac. Now, in that case, the gluten sensitivity is so high that it actually triggers an autoimmune attack in the body. So let's just say, one person out of 200 has that. So I always knew that. I was tested in my 20s, and they said, no, John, you don't have celiac. But gluten, I would say everybody responds to it, meaning it elicits some inflammation in the gut for everybody. And it's really just the extent. And so you cannot have celiac, but when you eat a boatload of pizza or white bread, you may not feel right. You may get some bloating in your gut. You may get a little brain fog and so on. And now I know, like, everyone going gluten-free, if you're not gluten-free, it probably makes you crazy. And you're like, I can't stand to hear any more about that. So I don't want to talk too much about it. But, something that's interesting sometimes is, take 4 weeks and just stop and then do a challenge test. Now, the challenge with gluten is that, if you're celiac, you can't go back and do a challenge test. But I did that for a while, and I was like, oh my God, I feel so much clearer, and I don't have the bloating in my gut and so on. So I can tolerate a little gluten, but when I start going big time on it, I don't feel well. And it's when I look at something I'm going to eat, I think about how am I going to feel in an hour or two. That's one time point. And then I try to project out, and where am I going to be in 20 years? Because I don't want to be old and tired, and I want to be, I want to be strong. I don't want to be old before my time, So yeah.
And when you've got kiddos and spouses you want to stay young forever. You don't want to miss a single moment. You want to have energy and vitality to keep up with those kiddos as they grow and their energy rises, right? So
I have a mission to protect them and teach them and instill good values in them, and to take care of my wife and my family, and and secondarily, so many people that I know have these great missions, and sometimes I see them pushing so hard that they're sacrificing their health, and I'm like, wow, the world needs you.
Yeah.
You need to take care of yourself. If you owned a factory and you had one machine, that was the key thing in that entire factory, would you run that 24/7, 365 and never do any maintenance and never take care of it? You would only if you're an idiot, because that machine's going to break down and then you have nothing. So,
Totally.
nothing, but so you can hear a little of the Boston accent. Yeah, nothing.
And I think to combat that, or to talk a little bit more about that, sleep, you're right. Entrepreneurs, moms, just people pushing towards a goal or taking care of a household. We fool ourselves to think we don't need sleep. We can survive on 3-4 hours of sleep. We're strong. We can push through the tiredness. And what's your take on sleep and how important that is to your health?
I mean, I think sleep is absolutely huge. And having really strong circadian rhythms is huge, meaning that you have a very deep sleep at night and then you're wide awake during the day. And we do a lot of things to screw up our sleep and a lot of things to screw up our circadian rhythms. And I think that's a root cause for a lot of people. And guess what? You don't sleep for a night or two, your cortisol levels start going through the roof. You can start appearing to be adult onset diabetic even if you're not. I mean, it screws up your biochemistry. And I mean, you and I know, if you didn't sleep well last night, I mean, you can drink a couple cups of strong coffee and you can muscle through it. Yeah. But you're using every bit of your energy and concentration trying to deal with that deficit. So, any way that you can get yourself more sleep. And so a couple things on the science side. We evolved and there were no light bulbs and there were no real artificial sources of light. So we evolved, and at night, the light that you would see came from a fire, that orangey flame that you got from a fire.
Yeah.
And so the body keys off the blue light, and from what I've read, there's 440 nanometers. I knew you were going to ask me that, but that seems like the key wavelength. So when you get blue light into your eyes, it tells your biochemistry, it tells your body, it tells your circadian rhythms that it's daytime. Mm-hmm. So how do you get blue light in your eyes at night? Well, step one, you grab your phone because it makes a little noise. And step two, you put it up to your face and it's right close to your eyes and you're shooting those blue photons into your eyes. And even though it's 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night, you're telling your brain, hey, wait a second. Oh, it's daytime. Don't release the melatonin. Don't reinforce my circadian rhythms. Wake me up. It's daytime. It's still, and that's just crazy. So if you go on your iPhone, let me see if I can actually do this. And because I've shown this, if you look on your iPhone, and you probably can't see it, but there's a little thing on this screen that says night shift.
Yes.
And the night shift is currently off. So Apple saw the research and they put a feature into the iPhone. So you can set it so that at 7 o'clock at night, it changes the color of the screen, takes out most of the blue wavelengths, and makes the screen kind of, orangey red. And then at 7 in the morning, it kicks back to the regular screen color. So if you have to look at your phone at night, which is probably not a great idea, but if you have to, then turn on night shift and tune it to your current, and you can also have it synchronized with the sunrise and sunset. So you never have to change it. So when they change daylight savings time, when the sun, when the days get shorter, the days get longer, the phone can adjust automatically. So that fixes one source of blue light going into your eyes. But guess what? Every light bulb, every LED, your smoke alarms, all the crap that you have around your house, and a lot of those are blue or they're white, that's shooting into your eyes. And I've seen studies that say you get up at night, you walk in, and there's your charger on your electric toothbrush, and your eyes are really open because they're really accommodating the light. That's enough to start screwing up your melatonin release. Wow. And so one other trick, and I ran and grabbed these before we went, because for $10. So and this is one of those ones where I'm always and my friends will attest to this. I always tell people I'm not a normal human. So and I want to do a shout out to Paul and So-Ching Jamine, because I didn't realize these were available. But you can get these on Amazon for $10. And it's not that you're trying to become a rock star, but when the sun goes down and you're going to watch, your 65-inch plasma, just pop on these babies, and guess what? You filter out all the blue wavelengths. In fact, all the blue LEDs in my house, like I can't tell if they're on or not when I have these glasses on, because it filters out all the blue light. Yeah. And so then you find when it's 10 o'clock and you want to go to bed, you're not like, wow, I'm still so wired. I should go in and create 26 new web pages, and I should record a video, and I should, So, when you block those blue wavelengths and put those babies on, you can stop that signal, which is just noise, which is screwing up your circadian rhythms, and you will sleep better.
What are they called? If they were to go on Amazon, what is called?
These are called, and I don't have, the initials on the side are UVEX. They cost like $10 on Amazon. I think they're on Amazon Prime. I'm not an investor in the company. Oh, no, right. But that's a cheap way. And if you want to go even higher end, I think if you, Dave Asprey sells some that are even more advanced. But I don't want to comment on the relative merits, but I think these are certainly a good value for $10, and you're probably going to get the bulk of the benefit that way.
We know that when we sleep better, we make better choices. We are more clear focused. We do make better choices in our health. We have energy to go exercise. We want to run around with the kiddos. So your sleep really is everything.
And we're more patient with our kids. We're better with our spouse. We're just better humans when we're well rested. Because when you're not, because the other thing that happens is at night that's when the cleanup crew comes into your brain. Well, all the brain cleanup happens at night. So if you look at, if you go to Dr. Daniel Amen's site and you look at his work, he's going to be like, get a good night's sleep, clean up your brain. Don't let all this crud build up in your brain. So it's not just, well, I have the effect during the day. It's also one of those things, what am I going to look like in 20 years? What's my blood cortisol? Am I going to be type 2 diabetic or not? Am I going to have to be injecting insulin every day and poking my different fingers with test strips to measure my blood glucose to decide how many units of insulin I need to inject? Mm-hmm. So I don't want to go down that path. You can't prevent everything, but boy, it's like if you don't want to hit an iceberg, if you take the course that's 500 miles south, your odds of running into an iceberg, you can reduce the odds by 80, 90, 95%, whatever. So nothing's foolproof, but I want to make smart moves, It's like putting a seatbelt on when I'm in the car. I might be able to get by without it, but I really would prefer not to fly through the windshield if somebody smashes into my car,
Right.
So.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, what about naps? Because whenever I talk about sleep, especially with new moms, I have a toddler that has nightmares and runs into our bed at night. So a lot of new moms have that myth that, their sleep always has to be disrupted. They can never, they can't sleep when the baby sleeps because they've got stuff to do, or the next day they've got stuff to do. What are your best tips about if somebody truly is sleep deprived? They're up with kiddos at night. They work night shift. They've got crazy things going on. How do you feel about naps or trying to make up that sleep if they've lost it?
I think it's a personal thing. I think for some people, naps are exceptionally helpful. So I look at my wife, she can nap during the day. Now for me, what works the best for me is to have a really deep sleep at night and then just to crank during the day. And if I take a nap, that kind of screws me up. So I think there's a personal thing. So if naps work for you, I think it's a great thing. Now you said third shift and it triggers something in my mind. Again, if you Google this, people that work third shift and have to sleep during the day, they have higher cancer rates because they're not releasing as much melatonin at night. They're not getting the deep sleep and so on. So if and again, I have friends of mine, and I've had times in my life where I was working all night and then sleeping during the day. So the trick is you got to get some good, blackout, sleep mask or whatever, get blackout blinds or put big blinds up over your windows. You got to make the environment dark so that you don't, because just a little bit of light will stop your body from secreting the melatonin. Then you're not going to get and I'm pretty sure everyone knows melatonin is the hormone the body secretes, a certain number of hours after the sun sets, which makes you sleep and helps you sleep deeply. And, seems to have a lot of other very beneficial effects in the body. So you really want to maximize your circadian rhythms and you want to maximize your melatonin release at night. So that way you get that really deep and rejuvenating sleep. So, I also, for myself, because there are times when, I've been I was on a 28-hour airline trip where I had to fly from Sydney to Bangkok to Delhi, India, to London. And then 2 days later, I had people coming in from all over Europe to hear me speak. And, you have to, so I'm a big believer that says sometimes you need to put in some earbuds. I've been using something called Holosync. There's a lot of good things that you can do. So I try to put in the right things into my ears and also the eye shades. And then our friend James has a cool app now with a little device that actually sends wavelengths to you. You kind of tell it, I'm flying from here to there. I don't know anything about it. I don't know if it works, but he's using it. So if you want to follow up with him and kind of interview him sometime and say, hey, how does it work? Because, he's flying from London all the way to Arizona or all the way out to San Jose or San Francisco. So that becomes even more critical. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you want to be proactive. It's like, you want to know what can you do to put your body in the best, situation or best shape that you're in. So
Sure.
I really wanted to keep going with that sleep. I wanted to, that was really important that the conversation went there because I know that's a struggle for a lot of people, but I want to circle back for a second. We touched a bit about fats and we talked about those trans fats, and because I tell a lot of people to eat their healthy fats. People are so afraid of fat.
Absolutely.
We've gone into this low fat. We think low fat is everything, which we know is such a myth. But you were teaching me a bit about what fats, between walnuts and flaxseed and cashews and avocado and cheese, you were telling me some really interesting things about.
Sure.
Not all fats are created equal. So can you talk a bit about that with the science?
Let's start out with your first piece, which is, what do you consume on a macro basis? Mm-hmm. And there's really only 3 macronutrients. Mm-hmm. You have protein, you have fat, you have carbohydrate.
Right.
Okay. Those are the macronutrients. So if and most people eat the right amount of protein, meaning if you're working out and you're putting on muscle, the body makes you crave foods that have protein. You just, I need to eat some chicken tonight. I need to have a steak. I need that, and so on. So most people eat the right amount of protein. The danger sometimes I've seen is sometimes people overload with the protein to lose weight. And the body starts burning protein. Protein does not make your blood sugar go up. It helps bring your insulin levels down. The danger I have with that is protein is based on repeating amino acids. And the word amino means that there's an NH2 group hanging there. And when you burn protein for fuel, you have to get rid of that nitrogen. So it produces a lot of ammonia in your body. So I tell people protein is structural. You want to get enough so that your hair grows well, your fingernails, you build muscle, you do tissue repair. Too little protein and you're screwed. Right. But when you go to too much and you start burning it as fuel, it's like burning plastic in your fireplace. Yeah, it burns and it makes heat, but there's this black soot that comes off. There's this black smoke. Protein does not burn very cleanly, and it puts a lot of load on the rest of your metabolism to get rid of all that ammonia. So NH2 gets converted to NH3, that's ammonia, then your body has to work to eliminate it. So I don't like to see people go mega on the protein because they're like, wow, I'm going to put on some muscle, give me more protein. More protein is good. And I say, be careful. You don't want to overload on it. So if you get the protein and people eat the right amount for most people, then basically when you say, I'm going to go low fat, well, you need calories. What happens? Low fat means high carbohydrate. Right. And that means you're bringing in just a ton of glucose into your body. And when I see people go low fat, some people can handle it. I mean, don't get me wrong. You can be healthy on a lot of different diets. And there's biochemical individuality. But for most people, when they go low fat, they have that low fat yogurt, no fat. But then it has the milk sugar in it, or some, because not all of it's been converted over. It has the lactose, the milk sugar, but then it has a bunch of fruit or a bunch of other stuff, and there's 22 grams or 15 grams or 17 grams of sugar. So low fat often means high carbohydrate. So we talked about how the body chops up carbohydrate into sugars, but if the sugars are already sugar, then you can, if you have a disaccharide, like just table sugar, you clip it in half and it's half fructose and half sucrose. You need to release insulin to drive that glucose into the cells. Mm-hmm. And if you don't, you're really, really, you've seen people whose, blood glucose goes up to 300 and 400. And that's like, get them in here and deal with it before they go into a coma or before something really bad happens. Yeah. So your body releases all this insulin and it drives that sugar into the cells. But the problem is when it drives all the sugar into the cells, then your blood sugar just plummets. Mm-hmm. And so you have that rush and then you have the crash. What do you need? It's like I see people that run into the vending machine to get a Coke. I'm like, oh, geez, that's a good plan. Or they got to get a candy bar. They got to get some chips. And so they're on this roller coaster ride where they're dumping all this carbohydrate, sugar, body dumps the insulin, then they crash, and then they come back up. So I think that the whole low-fat fad and has been, for a lot of people, it's been disastrous. And it's helped drive us on this whole type 2 diabetes epidemic that we're dealing with. It's aging people faster because all that glucose is reacting with your proteins and making these, glycolated proteins, which are nasty. There's so many problems with that. And so what I suggest to people is eat a lot of healthy fat. Eat an avocado. Unless you're allergic to avocados, have some avocado at breakfast, have some avocado at lunch. Yeah. My favorite oil is olive oil. It's a monounsaturated fat. So it has one, double bond. So it's much less susceptible to oxidation than would be corn oil or canola oil or, soybean oil and so on. In fact, when I go to people's houses and they're like, John, what should I do? I say, go in your cabinet and get rid of all the vegetable seed oils. Step one. And they're like, what? And so I would generally say use a ton of olive oil, but if you have to heat it, I don't like to heat olive oil to high temperature because not only can the fat oxidize, but some of the really good things in the olive oil, some of the polyphenols and some of the antioxidants, they also get destroyed. So I like to do olive oil cold. I like to drizzle it on food after. If you're making mashed potatoes, after you boil the potatoes and mash them, put a little olive oil in there. Eat a ton of, stream it on your vegetables. So it's a good fat, because what happens is when you eat fat, you don't need insulin to get it into the cells. And so I'm probably as lean as I've ever been my whole life. And I do blood work, and I got my fasting insulin levels down to about 3. So the normal range, I want to say, is like 2 to 20 or 2 to whatever. But when you have low insulin, there's a magic that happens, and that is insulin not only drives glucose into the cells, but glucose also controls your fat metabolism. So fats are triglycerides. I don't know if it helps when I talk with my hands, but there's a glycerin molecule, and then you have 3 fatty acids hooked to it, and that's called a triglyceride. So that's how you store fat in your cells. And when you have high insulin, let's just say you eat a meal and you have 3/4 of a pound of pasta, and then you have some butter and some other fat on there. What happens? The pasta drives up your blood sugar. The body dumps a bunch of insulin. And guess what? Not only does it drive the glucose into the cells, it shifts your fat metabolism towards storage. So whatever little fat, that little bit of Ben and Jerry's, you only had like half a dish, all the fats that you ate get driven into your cells. Now, if you have low insulin, then the body's like, oh, low insulin. Okay, we can actually go in and pull the fat out of the fat cells. We can hydrolyze the triglycerides. Hydro is water. So you just you need 1 water molecule to break each bond, and you separate it off as a fatty acid. And that's like a nice piece of wood to put on the fireplace. And so it burns, and it does not need insulin to drive it into the cells. So most people have shut down their fat metabolism because they've eaten so much carbohydrate and so much sugar that their insulin levels are high. So I like to do, I like to measure things, but I like to do like a fasting insulin test, once a year or once every couple of years. But if you don't want to spend the money on that, look at the ratio of your triglycerides to HDL. So your total triglycerides. So if your triglycerides are at 150 and your HDL cholesterol is at 50, that's a pretty good marker for your fasting insulin. So when I see people and they're like, oh my God, John, my triglycerides are like 500. And I'm like, and you have low HDL, and they're like, yeah, how did you know? And because it means that their fasting insulin is really high. And almost every time you get blood work done, they give you a number for your triglycerides, and they give you a number for your HDL. So, I got mine down to, close to 1-to-1 or maybe 1.2-to-1. So, I get my triglycerides to 80, and I get my, HDL up to 68 or whatever. And that is an incredibly good marker for whether or not you're going to have cardiovascular disease. Yeah. So, maybe a better marker than just, what's your total LDL. And by the way, if we could, let's circle back if we have time, and let's talk about kind of the best cholesterol test, because there's the cheapest cholesterol test, which is the one that your insurance company wants your doctor to check. And then there's the best one. And so if we get a chance, it's based on NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance. But if we get a chance, let's come back to that at the end, So.
Okay. Yeah, I think we are actually almost up at our time. So do you want to talk about that, or do you want to talk about fructose? Which one, scientist?
I'll do them both quick, because I never like to give up. So first of all, let's talk about fructose. Fructose is a sugar that's found in apples and pears and oranges. And a little bit of fructose is actually really good for you. So fructose gets sent to the liver. And when you have a little bit of fructose, the body uses it to make glycogen and store it in your liver. So you have that available if you need a little energy rush and so on. But if you want to Google Dr. Robert Lustig, who's out at University of California, I think he's at, I don't know which campus he's at, but he's at one of the University of California campuses. He has a YouTube video that has 40 million views or whatever. And he basically just takes you through, here's how fructose kills you. Because once you get above about 25 grams of fructose a day, it's like having a pot on the stove and you got this sugar boiling, right? As long as you keep it below 25 grams, everything's good. Exceed that, it starts to spill over into some really nasty pathways in your liver, and you start to do damage, and you can get fatty liver disease, you can get liver damage, you can get all these problems from excess fructose. And guess what? High fructose corn syrup didn't exist before the 1960s. That's something that was invented. It was actually invented in Japan, and it's a way to take corn and turn it into high fructose corn syrup. Fructose is the sweetest sugar. So when it's going to hit your taste buds, you get the biggest sweetness effect out of fructose. And so the cheapest way to sweeten something is to use high fructose corn syrup. And it's, like 55% fructose, 45%, glucose, or but it's got a little more fructose than glucose. But it kills you. So eat a couple apples, eat a banana, eat some fruit. I don't mind you getting the fructose that you get from, a reasonable quantity or small quantity of fruit. Right. But I don't want to kill people's brand names, but every beverage that's out there, yes. And you look, especially when it's a 16 ounce, and I remember one of the guys that worked for me was like, no, John, I told him, okay, that has 72 grams of sugar. And he goes, oh no, it only has 36. I go, check the serving size. And it was a 16 ounce bottle, but the serving size was 8 ounces. I go, so how many times do you just drink half a bottle? So he's getting 72 grams of sugar, and more than 50% of that is fructose. So that one sweetened beverage. It's like with my kids, I'm not a big believer in fruit juices. I give them fruit, but I don't give them apple juice. I give them fruit, but I don't give them orange juice. I give them the orange, or the apple. And then most of these things are like 10% real fruit juice. It should have to say underneath it, 90% crap. Right. But they focus on the positive, and I get that. I mean, I've run businesses. I get that, but fructose is brutal for most people, and almost everyone gets too much fructose. And those negative pathways. Just picture you have this pot on your stove, and you just keep dumping in the fructose, and that sugary goop starts spilling down on your stove and burning up and going down on the floor and just completely destroying your kitchen, because that's what you're doing to your metabolism. So that fructose is the number one way that processed food kills you. And unfortunately, it's the cheapest way to sweeten things. Now what you see is, wow, we're going to make our soda, but it's going to have cane sugar. So what does that do? It removes the word fructose from the label.
Really?
But the downside is cane sugar is a little less bad for you, because cane sugar is 50% glucose and 50% fructose. Wow. It's a disaccharide. It has two monosaccharides connected together. So it's only a little bit better, or a little bit less bad is probably a better way to say it.
And that's so interesting, because normally we would think cane sugar is sugar in the raw. It's more healthy. It's more natural. Where we've been a little bit versed in high fructose corn syrup, where people are like, oh, bad.
And then I've gone to people's houses, and they're like, John, wow, I went out, I got this stuff. It's agave nectar. Yes. I'm like, no, because they should the nickname for agave nectar should be super high fructose agave syrup, because it has even more fructose than high fructose corn syrup. So it sounds good. Yeah. It sounds really good. It sounds good on the label. It sounds like I'm really doing well for myself, but I'm not. But I still believe I would personally use table sugar before I would use the artificial sweeteners. We don't have time to deal with that. Because I get totally immersed in what I'm talking about. What was the other thing we were going to talk about?
Last thing we're going to end with, I know it's like we could talk for hours, and we could hours, is you wanted to tell us about the best cholesterol test to keep those healthy heart and lungs, to be around for our kiddos and the people we love.
Yeah. So the old school cholesterol test that they run, they actually don't measure the LDL directly. They calculate it. So when you go in and you get a normal blood panel, they do a cholesterol. They report out, here's your HDL, here's your LDL, here's your total cholesterol, here are your triglycerides. But they don't actually measure the LDL, number one. Number two, LDL can exist as big, fluffy beach ball particles. So there's very little surface area, per, nanogram of cholesterol. So there's a lot less opportunity for it to oxidize. Or LDL can exist as these small, dense particles that are like baseballs. And I just picture, which you want to have somebody throwing at you. You want to have somebody throwing you a big fluffy beach ball? Doesn't hurt. Somebody takes a baseball and lets it fly. Same thing to your heart arteries. The more you have your cholesterol as these small, dense particles, then the more likely, and you have this concentration gradient, the more likely you're going to trigger the damage to your arteries, which is going to trigger, cardiovascular disease. But the best way to measure it is the test, the number that's the most, it correlates the best with, are you really in danger for cardiovascular disease, is what's called LDL particle number. An LDL particle number tells you the total number of particles. Ideally, you want to be below 1,000 in that test. If you get above 2,000, then you're really in the danger zone. And so they do that test by NMR. So it's NMR is nuclear magnetic resonance, of course. Yeah. And it's the same thing as MRI, because when they came out with MRI, they knew if they called it nuclear that no one would ever get inside an MRI. So they just said, we're going to shorten it to magnetic resonance imaging. And then, so GE and the folks that came out with MRI, I'm old enough before there were any MRIs. And the only people that did NMR were chemists putting their little tubes in an NMR to see, to look at the molecules. But they take your blood, they call it the lipo NMR test, and they use nuclear magnetic resonance, and they measure each lipoprotein directly. So you know exactly how much HDL, you know exactly how much LDL, and then some of the other species that we don't have time to get into that are important. So that test is more pricey, and you may be able to get your doctor to check the box or not. But I have now determined over the last couple of years that you can actually order that test yourself. And so there's a company, there's several companies, but I think the one that has the best deal, it's called Request a Test. And their regular price for the lipid NMR profile is $99. And sometimes you get a coupon and it's $89. And again, I have nothing to do with them. I don't expect a kickback or anything, but I just thought, hey, they get a shout out because that is the most economical way. So if you can't get your doctor to order that lipid NMR profile, and you can Google it and you can go in with some information and show it to him, then, to me, for $99 or for $89, I got to know, and I want to make smart moves. And that's how I deal with health is make really good measurements.
Yes.
Then make some changes and then go back in 6 months or a year and say, wow, either I'm kicking ass or this isn't working for me. Right. You need to have objective measurements of what's happening in terms of your biochemistry. We don't have time to get into it. We'll have to do another one on, what I call health GPS. Yeah. Because your blood work are the global positioning satellites, and then you know exactly where you are. I hate when people just make blanket recommendations because we have biochemical individuality. We have different diets. We have different genetics. And what is great for one person can be no effect on another person, and even can be negative for a third person. So we didn't have time to get into that. I can't believe we already blasted through an hour. This is, it's been awesome to be on here with you. I've had fun, and I hope I didn't get too, as Brendan would say, I'm going to geek out on this stuff. Because I'm into it, but I'm trying to get deep enough where you can get it, but then try to bring it back up so you can use it. Because, if I get in here and start talking about, listen, you want to get a sunscreen that has, butyl methoxy dibenzyl methane, because that is a good UVA sunscreen, and that'll stop these wavelengths out here at 370 nanometers. You guys are going to be in a coma. I know that.
Totally. So I have one last question for you. One final question. You are probably one of the most intelligent people I've ever interviewed, ever had the pleasure of getting to know. Honestly, I could pick your brain and nerd out all day long. But with all this knowledge, I want to ask you, what is the greatest lesson you have ever learned in your life? Whether you learn that from someone close to you, whether you learn that in your studies or just life skills, what's the best lesson you were ever taught in your life that you want to pass on to people?
I tend, I've read a lot of Wayne Dyer, and I tend not to judge everything. So I've learned, dozens or hundreds of messages. So I'm just going to, grab the first one that comes to my mind. And my mother was, an absolutely exceptional person. And when she passed away, she made it to 82. She was she was the person I was talking about in terms of, eventually succumbing to cancer. And she was just an amazing person. She always lived her life from her heart. She always did what was right. She always took care of the people around her. She was very tuned in when somebody was, not feeling well. And when she passed, people came in from all over the country. Olympia Snow, who was was the senator from Maine, she sent a letter. It was just unbelievable how many thousands of people's lives that she had touched. And it's, people just, we had a reception afterwards, and people just kept coming up to me and telling me stories. So she taught me that you need to, live from your heart, and that you always need to do what's right, even if no one's watching. And those were amazing lessons for me. And I don't believe that the body is who you are. The body is a bunch of Legos. It's a bunch of carbon and nitrogen and oxygen, and there's an intelligence that you can't see that assembles that into fingernails and hair, and the pigment in your eyes that give you the eye color, and so on. And there's a point when the body is no longer functional, like a car that's finally, won't start again. And I think that intelligence then exits the body, and then the car, goes back to parts, and so does the body. And then it becomes part of a flower or a tree. So I don't think carbon and nitrogen and oxygen somehow magically learn how to think and feel. I think they're the Legos. So, it's my Lego model. And so I carry my mother, with me in my heart every day. And, it took me a long time to I always thought my mother was a saint, because she was always helping people. But what I learned when I got into my 30s was that the biggest joy you have in your life is when you can share something with somebody and you can help improve their lives, or you can touch their lives. And, it's fun to have stuff. It's fun to, drive a sports car, go on a boat. But this stuff is not fulfilling long-term. But when you help somebody, or somebody connects with you and they say, hey, John, look, let me show you my blood work, or let me do this, or let me do that. So that means everything to me. And and she also, made me realize that children are the most important thing in the world, and that your job is to protect children, whether they be your children or other people's children. And that, so I learned, hundreds of lessons from my mother, and I carry that forward. So that's just, that one jumps out at me. But thanks. I feel like was it Barbara Walters? She got me crying here. So it's like
it's beautiful. It's honest. It's real, and that is absolutely what I love best about you, John. Is that you are incredibly talented, incredibly intelligent. Very well accomplished in your life, but I had the pleasure of seeing you with your wife at a conference we were at together. I've seen some beautiful pictures of your kiddos. I've been able to connect with you on a friendship level, and you have the biggest heart and the biggest passion to help other people. And I can say that you are absolutely carrying on your mom's legacy and her message to just make people feel better and be there for their kiddos. And that's just so beautiful. So I think we're at the end of our time. We definitely have to do this again. I thank you so much for sharing your heart and your passion and your knowledge with my people and your people. And a lot of people are really going to learn and have some actionable things they can really get in control of their health and their happiness just by listening to this last hour together. So I thank you so much for being with me.
it really touched my heart, to talk with you today. And I love, you and I are both super hyperactive. I love the pace. I'm probably got to keep hitting the rewind button. Like, what the hell did I say? But that's okay. And so thank you so much for inviting me. And it was a great experience. And
Amazing.
you keep crushing it, and, keep helping those people, because I know that you're helping a lot of folks right now. So keep doing that. Okay.
Thank you. So if you want to check out John, you want to ask him questions, you want to pick this incredible brain of his, you can find him on Facebook, JohnSottery, John Sottery. He is amazing. He will answer your questions. And thank you so much for tuning in to this Empowered Life podcast. We'll see you again next time.